The blood on her hands was not her own, but everyone in Hangtown, California believed otherwise, and that was all that mattered in the summer of 1872. Zelda Fairmont stood in the center of Main Street with her fingers trembling and crimson staining her palms, watching as every shopkeeper turned their back on her. Every woman clutched their children close. Every man reached for their gun belt with suspicion burning in their eyes. The body of Jacob Pritchard lay in the dirt behind the general store, a knife wound clean through his ribs, and she had been the one screaming for help when they found her kneeling beside him. The marshal had taken one look at the scene, at the wealthy mine owner's son lying dead, and this girl with nothing but her seamstress skills, and a rented room above the millinery standing over him. And his mind had been made up before she could speak a word of truth. She tried to explain that she had heard Jacob calling for help, that she had run to find him already dying, that someone else had done this terrible thing. But the marshal saw only what he wanted to see, and the town followed his lead like sheep to slaughter. Within hours, the whispers had become shouts, and the shouts had become a unified voice of condemnation. Zelda Fairmont was a murderer, they said. She had been spurned by Jacob Pritchard when he chose another girl for the church social, and in her jealous rage, she had taken his life. None of it was true. She barely knew Jacob Pritchard beyond polite nods on the street. She had no reason to harm him, no connection to him at all. But truth meant nothing when measured against the weight of assumption and prejudice. The Pritchard family owned half the gold claims in the area, and they wanted justice swift and certain. Within a day, she lost her job at the dress shop. Within 2 days, her landlady evicted her with cold eyes and colder words. Within 3 days, no one in Hangtown would sell her food or water or give her the time of day. Zelda found herself sleeping in an abandoned prospector's shack on the outskirts of town, hungry and desperate, with nowhere to turn and no one to believe her innocence. The marshal had not arrested her yet, because he claimed he was building his case, but she knew the truth. He was waiting for the town's rage to reach its peak, waiting for the moment when he could lock her away or worse, and no one would question it. She had seen it happen before to others who found themselves on the wrong side of public opinion in this harsh land, where justice was swift and mercy was scarce. On the 4th day, she walked into town with her head held high despite the gnawing hunger in her belly and the despair weighing on her heart. She needed to try one more time to find someone, anyone, who would listen to her story. The general store owner spat at her feet. The doctor turned away when she approached his office. The preacher closed the church doors in her face. She stood on the wooden sidewalk outside the saloon, watching the world that had once been her home treat her like a plague, and felt tears burning behind her eyes that she refused to let fall. That was when she saw him. A stranger rode into town on a dusty buckskin horse, his hat pulled low against the afternoon sun, his face weathered and handsome in the way of men who spent their lives under open skies. He dismounted outside the saloon with the easy grace of someone who had been born in a saddle, and as he tied his horse to the hitching post, his eyes swept the street and landed on her. Most men looked at her now with disgust or suspicion or cruel amusement. This man looked at her with simple curiosity, nothing more and nothing less. She should have walked away. She should have known better than to hope. But desperation makes fools of the wisest people, and she was drowning in it. When he walked toward the saloon doors, she stepped into his path. He stopped, his gray eyes meeting hers with a directness that felt strange after days of averted gazes and hostile stares. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice low and smooth like river stones worn by time. He moved to step around her, but she shifted to block him again. "Please," she said, and hated how her voice cracked on that single word. Please, I need someone to listen, just for a moment. He studied her face, taking in the dark circles under her eyes, the hollows in her cheeks, the desperate set of her jaw. You look like you have been through something difficult. I have been accused of murder, she said bluntly, because there was no point in dancing around the truth. The whole town believes I killed a man. They have shunned me, cast me out, and I am running out of time before the marshal decides to make his arrest. But I am innocent. I swear on everything I hold sacred, I did not do this thing. She watched his expression, waiting for the familiar pattern to play out. The doubt, the discomfort, the excuse to walk away. But instead he tilted his head slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. Tell me what happened. Those 4 words were more than anyone had offered her in days. She felt something break open inside her chest, a dam of held breath and suppressed fear. 4 nights ago, I was walking home from the dress shop where I worked. I heard someone crying out near the alley behind the general store. When I ran to help, I found Jacob Pritchard on the ground with a knife in his chest. He was already dying. I knelt down, tried to stop the bleeding, but it was too late. He died right there, and I screamed for help. When people came running, they saw me covered in his blood and assumed the worst. The real killer was long gone by then. Did you see anyone else? Hear anything? She shook her head, grateful beyond measure that he was asking questions instead of making judgments. I heard footsteps running away, but it was dark. By the time I looked up from Jacob, whoever it was had disappeared into the shadows. The marshal did not even investigate that possibility. He took one look at me and decided I was guilty. Why would they think you had reason to kill him? Because they needed someone to blame, and I was convenient. The Pritchards are powerful here. They want justice, and I am an easy target. I have no family, no money, no influence, just my word against their grief and anger. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling exposed and vulnerable in the harsh sunlight. I know how this sounds. I know you have no reason to believe me, but I am telling the truth. I did not kill Jacob Pritchard. The stranger was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her feel seen for the first time in days. Then he said something that nearly brought her to her knees with the relief of it. I believe you. She stared at him, certain she had misheard. What? I believe you, he repeated, his voice steady and sure. I have been tracking criminals for 5 years now as a bounty hunter, and I have learned to read people. You are not lying. You are scared and desperate, but you are not guilty. Tears did fall then, hot and fast down her cheeks. She could not stop them, could not hold back the wave of emotion that crashed over her. Someone believed her. A stranger, a man whose name she did not even know, had looked at her and seen the truth that everyone else had refused to acknowledge. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you. You cannot know what it means to hear someone say that. He reached out and gently touched her shoulder, a brief gesture of comfort that felt like an anchor in a storm. What is your name, Zelda? Zelda Fairmont. My name is Russell Vaughn. And if you are innocent, Zelda, then someone else is guilty. Someone in this town got away with murder and let you take the blame. That does not sit right with me. He glanced around at the hostile faces, watching them from doorways and windows. Looks like you have made some enemies. The whole town, she said bitterly. They will not sell me food or give me shelter. I have been living in an abandoned shack outside town, and I do not know how much longer I can survive this way. Russell's jaw tightened. That ends now. Come with me. He turned and walked into the saloon, and after a moment of stunned hesitation, Zelda followed. The interior was dim and smelled of tobacco and whiskey, and every conversation stopped dead when she crossed the threshold. The bartender, a thick man named Coleman with a scar across his chin, glared at her with open hostility. "Get her out of here," Coleman growled. "We do not serve murderers." Russell walked up to the bar with a calm confidence that commanded attention. "You will serve the lady whatever she wants, and you will do it with a civil tongue in your head." "The hell I will. That girl killed Jacob Pritchard in cold blood. That girl has not been tried or convicted of anything. Last I checked, this was still America, where people are innocent until proven guilty." Russell's hand rested casually on his gun belt, not quite a threat but close enough to make his point clear. "Now, she looks half-starved, and I am guessing that is because you and everyone else in this town have decided to play judge and jury without bothering with the facts. So here is what is going to happen. You are going to bring her a hot meal and something to drink. You are going to treat her like any other paying customer, and if you have a problem with that, we can step outside and discuss it further." The silence in the saloon was absolute. Coleman looked at Russell, taking in the gun on his hip, the hard set of his shoulders, the absolute certainty in his eyes. After a long moment, the bartender spat into a brass spittoon and jerked his head toward a table in the corner. "She can eat, but she pays up front." Russell pulled out a silver dollar and slapped it on the bar. "Keep the change." Zelda followed him to the corner table, her legs shaking beneath her skirts. She sank into the chair, unable to quite believe what had just happened. Russell sat across from her, his back to the wall so he could watch the room, and when the bartender brought over 2 plates of beef stew and fresh bread, she nearly wept again at the sight of real food. "Eat," Russell said gently. "You need your strength." She did not need to be told twice. The stew was hot and savory, and she ate with the desperate hunger of someone who had been living on scraps and hope for days. Russell ate more slowly, his eyes constantly scanning the room, watching the other patrons who were watching them with varying degrees of suspicion and anger. "Why are you doing this?" Zelda asked between bites. "You do not know me. You have no reason to get involved in my troubles. I told you, I believe you are innocent." He met her gaze across the table. "And I have seen too many innocent people get crushed by mobs and corrupt lawmen to stand by and let it happen again. If someone murdered Jacob Pritchard, they need to answer for it. And if you are being used as a scapegoat, then you deserve someone in your corner fighting for the truth. The marshal will not be happy that you are helping me. The Pritchards will not be happy. You are making powerful enemies for someone you just met." Russell shrugged. "Would not be the first time. I have never been good at staying quiet when I see injustice." She studied him across the table, this unexpected ally who had appeared out of nowhere like an answer to a prayer she had been too afraid to speak out loud. He was older than her, maybe by 7 or 8 years, putting him somewhere in his mid-20s. His face was tanned and lined from weather and experience, his hands calloused from years of hard work. There was a stillness about him, a quiet strength that made her feel safer than she had in days. "What made you become a bounty hunter?" she asked, curious about this man who had so easily stepped into the role of her defender. "My father was a sheriff in Texas. Saw him try to uphold the law in a place where power mattered more than justice. He made enemies of the wrong people, and they killed him for it when I was 18. After that, I figured I would rather hunt down the guilty on my own terms than work within a system that could be so easily corrupted." His expression was distant, remembering old pain. "It is not a perfect life, but it is an honest one. I catch the people who need catching, and I make sure they face justice. And now you are here, helping me instead of chasing whoever you came to town for." "I was just passing through, actually. No particular destination in mind, but it seems like fate put me here for a reason." He finished his stew and pushed the plate aside. "Tell me everything you remember about that night. Every detail, no matter how small. If we are going to find the real killer, we need to start somewhere. Zelda closed her eyes, forcing herself back to that terrible night. I was leaving the dress shop around 7 in the evening. It was starting to get dark. I usually walk straight home up Main Street, but that night I remembered I needed thread from the general store, so I cut through the alley to get there before it closed. That is when I heard someone gasping for air, like they could not breathe. I ran toward the sound and found Jacob behind the store, lying on his back with a knife sticking out of his chest. Was the knife still in him when you found him? Yes. I pulled it out trying to help him, trying to stop the bleeding. That was a mistake, I know that now. It just made things worse. She opened her eyes, meeting Russell's steady gaze. He tried to say something to me, but he could not get the words out. He just kept making this horrible gurgling sound, and then he stopped moving. That is when I screamed. Did you recognize the knife? She shook her head. It was just an ordinary hunting knife. Could have belonged to anyone. What about Jacob? Did he have any enemies? Anyone who might want him dead? I did not know him well enough to say. He was the son of Thomas Pritchard, who owned several gold mines east of town. The family is wealthy and influential. Jacob himself was known for being charming but maybe a bit wild. He liked to gamble and drink, from what I heard, but I cannot imagine who would want to kill him. Russell leaned back in his chair, thinking. The fact that the marshal did not investigate further suggests either incompetence or something more deliberate. If he wanted to close the case quickly by blaming you, that might mean the real killer is someone with enough influence to pressure him into looking the other way. Or he is just lazy and prejudiced and saw an easy solution, Zelda said bitterly. Maybe. But I have learned not to assume incompetence when corruption is just as likely. He stood, dropping another coin on the table. I am going to ask around town, see what I can find out about Jacob Pritchard and who might have wanted him dead. You should come with me. I do not trust leaving you alone right now. They left the saloon together, and Zelda felt the weight of 100 hostile stares following them. Russell did not seem bothered by the attention. He walked with the easy confidence of a man who had faced down worse than angry townspeople and lived to tell about it. Their first stop was the general store, where the owner's wife grudgingly answered Russell's questions while shooting poisonous looks at Zelda. Yes, Jacob Pritchard had been a regular customer. No, she had not noticed anything unusual about him in the days before his death. No, she did not know of anyone who had a grudge against him, and would they please leave because their presence was bad for business. The pattern repeated itself at the blacksmith, the livery stable, and the post office. Everyone clamped up at the sight of Zelda, unwilling to say much beyond confirming basic facts. Russell remained patient and persistent, his questions careful and deliberate, but they were getting nowhere. As the afternoon wore on and the sun began its descent toward the mountains, they found themselves outside the marshal's office. Russell looked at the weathered building with narrowed eyes. Time to talk to the law. You ready for this? Zelda squared her shoulders. As ready as I will ever be. Marshal Henry Cobb was a man in his 50s with a thick mustache and eyes like chips of flint. He looked up from his desk when they entered, and his expression went from neutral to hostile the instant he saw Zelda. You got nerve coming here, Cobb said, standing up and resting his hand on his gun. I have been lenient with you, girl, giving you time to make peace before I bring you in, but do not mistake my patience for weakness. She is innocent, Russell said flatly. And if you had done your job properly, you would have realized that by now. Cobb's face flushed red. Who the hell are you? Russell Vaughn, bounty hunter out of Texas, and I have seen enough crooked lawmen to recognize one when I meet him. The air in the office went deadly still. Cobb's hand tightened on his gun, but Russell did not flinch. You want to accuse me of something, boy. You better be ready to back it up. I am saying you closed this case before you even started investigating. Zelda Fairmont found the body and tried to help the victim. And for that, you have condemned her without evidence, without witnesses, without anything beyond circumstantial coincidence. That is either incompetence or deliberate negligence, and either way, it makes you unfit to wear that badge. I have evidence, Cobb snarled. She was found with the murder weapon in her hand, covered in the victim's blood. She was trying to save his life. That is not the same as taking it. She had motive. Jacob Pritchard rejected her, and she killed him in a jealous rage. That is a lie, Zelda said, her voice shaking with anger. I barely knew Jacob. We were never courting, and he certainly never rejected me. Where did you get that story? Cobb's eyes flickered just for a moment, and Zelda saw something there that made her blood run cold. Uncertainty. He was repeating a story someone had told him, not facts he had uncovered himself. Who told you that Jacob rejected her? Russell pressed. Because unless you have witnesses or letters or some kind of proof, you are basing your entire case on gossip and assumption. I have enough to convince a jury, Cobb said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. And when I bring her in for trial, they will see what I see. A girl with no family and no prospects who got ideas above her station and killed a man when he put her in her place. Russell took a step forward, his presence filling the small office. Here is what I see, Marshal. I see a lazy man who took the easy path instead of doing the hard work of real investigation. I see someone who would rather railroad an innocent woman than risk offending the powerful family demanding quick justice. And I see a man who is about to have his comfortable little arrangement disrupted because I am not going anywhere until the truth comes out. For a moment, Zelda thought Cobb might actually draw his gun, but Russell stared him down with an intensity that could melt steel, and finally, the marshal looked away. Get out of my office, Cobb said through gritted teeth. And keep that girl out of trouble, or I will lock her up tonight instead of waiting. They left, and Zelda did not release her held breath until they were back out on the street. That went well, she said with bitter sarcasm. Better than you might think, Russell said thoughtfully. He is hiding something. Did you see how he reacted when I asked where he got the story about you and Jacob? Someone fed him that lie, and he ran with it without checking. If we can figure out who started that rumor, we might find our killer. Where do we even start? This whole town believes it. Then we find out who said it first. Rumors start somewhere with someone. He glanced up at the darkening sky. It is getting late. You said you have been staying in a shack outside town, she nodded, ashamed. It is not much, but it keeps the rain off. That will not do. You are coming with me. I have a room at the boarding house, and you can stay there where you will be safe and fed properly. I cannot ask you to do that. You have already done so much. You are not asking. I am offering. His voice was gentle but firm. Zelda, you are in real danger here. The marshal is looking for an excuse to arrest you, and if the mob mentality gets worse, you could be facing a lynching before any trial happens. I will not let that happen to you. So we are going to the boarding house. You are going to eat a proper meal and get a good night's sleep. And tomorrow we are going to find out who really killed Jacob Pritchard. She wanted to argue, wanted to maintain some shred of independence and dignity. But the truth was that she was exhausted, terrified, and completely out of options. Russell Vaughn was offering her safety and belief in her innocence, two things she desperately needed. Pride was a luxury she could not afford. Thank you, she said quietly. I do not know how I will ever repay you for this kindness. Just help me find the truth. That is all the payment I need. The boarding house was run by a stern woman named Mrs. Patterson, who looked at Zelda with clear disapproval, but did not refuse her entry when Russell paid for an additional room. They ate dinner in the common dining area, ignoring the whispers and stares from the other boarders, and afterward, Russell walked Zelda to her room. "Lock the door and do not open it for anyone but me," he instructed. "I will be right next door if you need anything. Tomorrow we start digging into Jacob Pritchard's life and finding out who wanted him dead." Zelda nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of everything that had happened today. This morning she had been alone and hopeless, certain that her life was effectively over. Tonight she had an ally, a room with a real bed, and a chance at proving her innocence. All because a stranger had ridden into town and chosen to believe her when no one else would. "Russell," she said as he turned to leave, "why did you believe me? Really? You said you can read people, but there must be more to it than that." He was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. "When I was 19, I watched an innocent woman get hanged for a crime she did not commit. I knew she was innocent. A lot of people knew, but nobody spoke up because it was easier to let her die than fight against the men who wanted her dead. I have carried that guilt with me ever since. I swore that if I ever saw something like that happening again, I would not stay silent. So when I looked at you today and saw someone desperate for anyone to believe them, I knew I could not walk away. Not again." The raw honesty in his voice made her chest ache. "I am sorry that happened to you, to her, me too, but maybe this time we can get it right." He gave her a small, sad smile. "Get some rest, Zelda. We have a lot of work ahead of us." She locked the door behind him and stood in the center of the small room, looking at the clean bed with its quilted coverlet, the wash basin with fresh water, the window with curtains that blocked out the hostile world. For the first time in days, she felt something other than despair. She felt hope. Zelda washed her face and hands, scrubbing away days of dirt and fear, then climbed into bed still wearing her dress because she had no nightgown and no other clothes. The mattress was soft beneath her, a luxury after nights on hard ground, and she sank into it with a sigh of relief. Her body was exhausted, but her mind raced with thoughts of Russell Vaughn and his steady gray eyes, the way he had stood up for her without hesitation, the strength in his voice when he said those 3 simple words. "I believe you." She had been so alone for so long. First when her parents died of fever 3 years ago, leaving her orphaned at 18 with nothing but her sewing skills to survive on. Then, when the town turned against her, cutting her off from every human connection she had built. The loneliness had been almost worse than the fear. But now, lying in this small room knowing Russell was just beyond the wall, she did not feel quite so alone anymore. Sleep came eventually, deep and dreamless, and she woke to morning sunlight streaming through the window and someone knocking on her door. "Zelda, it is Russell. Time to get moving." She opened the door to find him standing there with 2 cups of coffee and a determined look on his face. "I have been thinking about our next move. We need to talk to Jacob's friends, find out what he was up to in the days before he died. Someone knows something, even if they do not realize it is important." They drank their coffee in her room while Russell outlined his plan. Jacob had been known to frequent the saloon and the gambling hall, so they would start there. They would ask questions, follow leads, and piece together the last days of his life, until they found something that pointed to a motive and a killer. "People are not going to want to talk to me," Zelda warned. "They will clam up the minute they see my face." "Then you will wait outside while I ask the questions. I know it is not fair, but we need information more than we need to make a point about your innocence right now." He set down his empty cup. "Once we find the real killer, the town will have to accept they were wrong. Until then, we do what we have to do." They started at the gambling hall, a seedy establishment on the edge of town that opened early to catch miners coming off the night shift. Russell went inside while Zelda waited across the street, trying to make herself as inconspicuous as possible. She watched through the window as Russell talked to the dealer, a thin man with slicked hair who shook his head repeatedly. After nearly 20 minutes, Russell emerged looking frustrated. Jacob was there 3 nights before he died. Won a substantial amount at poker, apparently. The dealer remembers because Jacob was bragging about it, saying he was finally going to pay off his debts. Russell frowned. What debts? I thought the Pritchards were wealthy. They are, Zelda confirmed. Thomas Pritchard owns 3 gold mines and has investments in half the businesses in town. His family wants for nothing. Then why would Jacob have debts? Russell's eyes narrowed. Let us find out. They spent the next several hours moving through town, Russell asking questions while Zelda waited in the shadows. Slowly, a picture began to emerge of Jacob Pritchard that differed significantly from the golden boy image the town had embraced. He gambled heavily and often lost. He borrowed money from friends and rarely paid it back. He had been seen arguing with several people in the weeks before his death, though no one would say what the arguments were about. By afternoon, they had compiled a list of 5 people who might have had reason to want Jacob dead. 3 men he owed money to, a woman whose brother he had cheated in a card game, and surprisingly, his own father Thomas Pritchard, who according to one brave soul had been overheard saying he was tired of cleaning up his son's messes. Any one of them could be guilty, Russell said as they sat on a bench outside the post office, reviewing what they had learned. But we need proof. We need someone who saw something or knows something concrete. The marshal never talked to any of these people, Zelda said, anger rising in her chest. He never investigated Jacob's debts or his arguments or anything. He just blamed me and called it justice. Because it was convenient, Russell agreed, but we are not done yet. Tonight I am going back to that saloon where Jacob won his last poker game. I want to talk to everyone who was there that night, find out exactly what happened and who might have been angry about it. Let me come with you, Zelda said. Please. I know people do not want to see me, but this is my life we are talking about. I cannot just sit in a room and wait while you do all the work. Russell studied her face, seeing the determination there, the need to be part of her own salvation. Finally, he nodded. All right. But you stay close to me, and if things get dangerous, you follow my lead. Agreed. Agreed. That evening, they returned to the saloon together. The room went quiet when they entered, but Russell walked to the bar with confidence and ordered 2 whiskeys. The bartender, Coleman, served them with ill grace, and Russell slid some coins across the scarred wood surface. I am trying to find out about a poker game that happened here about a week ago. Jacob Pritchard won big. Who was playing with him? Coleman glanced at Zelda with obvious distaste but answered the question. There were 4 others at that table: Murphy, the assayer, Harrison, who owns the feed store, a drifter whose name I did not catch, and Vincent Kane. Russell went very still. Vincent Kane. The Vincent Kane who runs the freight company. That would be the one. Lost about $300 that night from what I heard. Was not happy about it either. $300 was a substantial sum, enough to ruin a small businessman or push someone already in financial trouble over the edge. Russell and Zelda exchanged glances. They had a solid lead. Where can I find Kane? Russell asked. He has an office down by the freight depot. But I would be careful if I were you. Vincent Kane is not a man to cross lightly. He has a temper and the muscle to back it up. They left the saloon and walked through the darkening streets toward the freight depot. The office was a small building with a painted sign that read Kane Freight and Transport. Light glowed in the windows, suggesting someone was working late. Russell tried the door and found it unlocked. They stepped inside to find a burly man in his 40s sitting at a desk covered in ledgers and papers. He looked up at their entrance, and his expression went from surprise to suspicion in the space of a heartbeat. "We are closed," Vincent Kane said flatly. "Come back tomorrow." "I just have a few questions," Russell said easily. "About Jacob Pritchard." Kane's face darkened. "I have nothing to say about that boy. He is dead, and I am sorry for his family's loss. Now get out. You were playing poker with him the night before he died. You lost $300. That is a lot of money." "What are you implying?" Kane stood up, and Zelda could see the violence coiled in his thick frame. "I lost some money in a card game. So what? That does not make me a killer. Nobody said you were. But you were one of the last people to see Jacob alive, and you had a motive if you thought he cheated you out of that money." Kane's hand moved to his belt, and Zelda saw the knife hanging there in a worn leather sheath. A knife very similar to the one that had killed Jacob Pritchard. Russell saw it too, his body tensing as he prepared for violence. "I won that money fair and square," Kane snarled, "and I did not kill him. Now you have about 3 seconds to get out of my office before I throw you out." "Did you tell the marshal about the poker game?" Russell pressed. "Did you mention that you lost money to Jacob?" "Why would I? That girl killed him. Everyone knows it." Kane pointed at Zelda with a thick finger. "She is standing right there, the murderer herself. You are wasting your time defending her, stranger. She is guilty as sin." "She is innocent," Russell said with absolute certainty. "And someone in this town knows it. Someone who watched an innocent woman get blamed for a crime they committed." Kane's expression flickered, something that might have been guilt or might have been anger. It was impossible to tell. "Get out," he repeated. "I am done talking to you." Russell held his ground for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "We will go. But if you think of anything else about that night, anything at all, you can find me at the boarding house." They left the office, and once they were back on the street, Zelda let out a shaky breath. He could be the killer. He had motive and opportunity, and did you see that knife on his belt? "I saw it," Russell confirmed. "But seeing a knife is not the same as proving he used it to kill Jacob. We need more. We need a witness or evidence that connects him directly to the crime scene." "How are we supposed to get that? It has been days. Any evidence is long gone." Russell was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then his eyes lit up with an idea. "The knife. You said you pulled the knife out of Jacob's chest." "Yes. It was a terrible mistake, but I was not thinking clearly." "What happened to it afterward?" Zelda frowned, trying to remember through the chaos of that night. "I dropped it when I screamed." The marshal picked it up and took it as evidence. "So it is probably still at his office, locked up somewhere. If we could get a look at that knife, compare it to the one Kane carries, we might be able to tell if they are a matched set or have distinctive markings that connect them." "You want to break into the marshal's office and steal evidence?" "I prefer the term borrow for examination, but yes, essentially." Russell's expression was grim but determined. "I know it is risky, but we are running out of time and options. The marshal is going to arrest you soon, and once that happens, proving your innocence becomes exponentially harder. We need something concrete to present, some piece of evidence that forces people to question their assumptions." Zelda looked at this man who was willing to risk so much for her, a stranger he had met just yesterday. She barely knew him, yet he was proposing breaking the law to help her. It was dangerous and foolish and possibly doomed to fail. But what choice did she have? "When?" she asked simply. "Tonight. Late, when the town is asleep. The marshal lives above his office, but he is a heavy drinker. I saw 3 empty bottles in his office earlier. If we are quiet and quick, we can get in and out before he knows we were there." They spent the evening at the boarding house, eating a tense dinner and waiting for the hours to crawl past. Mrs. Patterson watched them with narrowed eyes, clearly suspicious of their presence, but she said nothing beyond asking if they would be paying for another night. Russell assured her they would. At midnight, when the town had gone dark and quiet, they slipped out of the boarding house and made their way through the shadows to the marshal's office. The building was dark, the only light coming from a window on the second floor where Cobb presumably slept. Russell tried the door and found it locked, but he pulled a thin piece of metal from his pocket and worked at the mechanism until it clicked open. "Where did you learn to do that?" Zelda whispered. "Bounty hunting teaches you all sorts of useful skills," he murmured back. "Stay behind me and keep watch." They crept inside, and Russell lit a small candle that he had shielded with his hand to keep the light minimal. The office was cluttered and smelled of old tobacco. Russell moved to the desk, opening drawers as quietly as possible, searching for the murder weapon. Zelda stood by the door, her heart pounding so hard she was sure it would wake the marshal. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like thunder in her ears. She could hear snoring from above, a rhythmic rumble that at least suggested Cobb was deeply asleep. "Found it," Russell whispered, holding up a knife in a cloth evidence bag. He pulled it out carefully, examining the blade in the candlelight. "Ordinary hunting knife, like you said. Steel blade, wooden handle, no distinctive markings that I can see. Wait, there is something here." He turned the handle, and Zelda saw what he had noticed. 2 small initials carved into the wood, almost invisible unless you knew to look for them. V.K., Vincent Kane. They stared at the knife, the evidence that connected Kane directly to the murder. This was what they needed, the proof that would force people to question the story they had been told. A floorboard creaked overhead. The snoring had stopped. "Time to go," Russell said urgently. He rewrapped the knife and put it back exactly where he had found it, then grabbed Zelda's hand and pulled her toward the door. They slipped outside just as they heard heavy footsteps on the stairs inside. They ran, keeping to the shadows, not stopping until they were safely back at the boarding house. Only then did they stop to catch their breath, leaning against the wall in the dark hallway. "We have him," Zelda gasped. "Those initials on the knife, that proves Kane killed Jacob." "It proves the knife belonged to Kane at some point," Russell corrected. "But it is a strong piece of evidence. Combined with the motive of losing money and his defensive behavior tonight, it is enough to at least make the marshal investigate him properly." "The marshal will not do anything. We already know he is either incompetent or bought off." Russell nodded slowly. "Then we force his hand. Tomorrow we confront Kane publicly. We tell everyone about the knife and the initials. We make enough noise that the marshal has to act, or risk looking even more corrupt than he already does." "That is dangerous. Kane could come after us." "He could. But staying silent is more dangerous for you." Russell's eyes were intense in the dim light. "Zelda, if we do not do this now, you are going to hang for a crime you did not commit. I would rather face Kane's anger than let that happen." The conviction in his voice made something warm bloom in her chest. This man, this stranger who had appeared in her life less than 2 days ago, was putting himself at risk for her without hesitation. She had spent so long alone, believing she had no one, that having someone fight for her with such determination felt almost overwhelming. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked softly. "You said you felt guilty about the woman who was hanged, but there has to be more to it. You barely know me." "I am nobody to you." Russell was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and honest. "You are not nobody. You are a woman who deserves justice and truth and someone willing to stand beside her when the world turns its back, and maybe that is reason enough. Or maybe I see something in you that makes me want to fight harder, be better, do more. I cannot fully explain it myself. I just know that from the moment I saw you standing in that street, desperate for anyone to believe you. I could not walk away." The air between them felt charged, heavy with things unsaid and feelings too new to name. Zelda reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you, Russell, for everything. For believing me when no one else would, for fighting for me, for making me feel less alone." His fingers tightened around hers. "You are not alone, not anymore. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together." They stood there in the dark hallway, hands clasped, drawing strength from each other. Then Russell walked her to her room, said goodnight with a lingering look that made her pulse quicken, and disappeared into his own room next door. Zelda lay in bed, her mind racing too fast for sleep. Tomorrow they would confront Vincent Kane. Tomorrow they would force the truth into the light. Tomorrow everything would change, one way or another. But tonight, in this quiet moment, she let herself think about Russell Vaughn and the way he looked at her with respect and belief, and something else that made her stomach flutter. She barely knew him, yet she trusted him more than she had trusted anyone in years. He had become her champion, her defender, her friend. And maybe, given time, something more than that. She fell asleep with that thought warming her, and woke to another knock on her door and Russell's voice calling her name. The morning was clear and bright, the California sun already warming the air. They ate a quick breakfast, then headed directly to the center of town where they knew people would be gathering for the morning market. Russell positioned himself in front of the general store, and Zelda stood beside him, her heart racing with fear and hope in equal measure. "People of Hangtown," Russell called out in a voice that carried across the street, "I need your attention for a moment." Heads turned. People stopped what they were doing. The crowd that gathered was hostile, but they were curious enough to listen. "My name is Russell Vaughn, and I am a bounty hunter. I have spent the last 2 days investigating the murder of Jacob Pritchard because I believed that Zelda Fairmont was innocent of the crime. I am here to tell you that I have found evidence proving exactly that." "She is guilty," someone shouted from the crowd. "We all know it." "You know what you were told to believe," Russell corrected. "But you were lied to. The knife that killed Jacob Pritchard has initials carved into the handle, VK, Vincent Kane's initials. The same Vincent Kane who lost $300 to Jacob in a poker game the night before he died. The same Vincent Kane who has been awfully quiet while everyone focused their anger on an innocent woman." The crowd murmured, uncertainty rippling through them. Russell pressed his advantage. "The marshal has that knife in his evidence locker right now. Ask him to show it to you. Ask him why he never investigated those initials or questioned Kane. Ask him why he was so quick to blame Zelda when there was another suspect with clear motive and opportunity." "This is ridiculous," a voice boomed, and Vincent Kane himself pushed through the crowd, his face red with rage. "You are making wild accusations with no proof." "The knife has your initials on it," Russell said calmly. "That is proof enough to warrant investigation. Unless you can explain how your knife ended up in Jacob Pritchard's chest." Kane's eyes darted around the crowd, seeing the doubt beginning to form on people's faces. "I lost that knife weeks ago. Someone must have stolen it and used it to frame me. This stranger is trying to deflect blame from his guilty friend. Then you will not mind if the marshal brings out the knife right now and we all take a look at it together," Russell said. "Marshal Cobb, are you here?" The marshal was indeed there, standing at the edge of the crowd with an expression that suggested he knew his comfortable situation was falling apart. "This is highly irregular," he said stiffly. "So is railroading an innocent woman," Russell shot back. "Bring out the knife, Marshal. Let everyone see the initials. Let them decide for themselves whether Kane's story makes sense." Cobb hesitated, clearly torn between maintaining his authority and avoiding making things worse. Finally, with obvious reluctance, he turned and walked back to his office. The crowd waited in tense silence, and Zelda felt Russell's hand brush against hers, a brief touch of reassurance. The marshal returned with the knife, still wrapped in its cloth. He held it up so the crowd could see, then unwrapped it and turned the handle to display the carved initials. VK. The crowd erupted in noise, everyone talking at once. Kane tried to push forward, tried to grab the knife, but several men held him back. "I told you I lost that knife," Kane insisted, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Someone took it from me." "When did you lose it?" Russell demanded. "And why did you not report it stolen?" Kane's mouth opened and closed. He had no good answer. "You killed Jacob Pritchard," Russell said, his voice cutting through the noise. "You lost money to him, more money than you could afford to lose. Maybe you thought he cheated you. Maybe you just could not stand losing. So you followed him that night, stabbed him in an alley, and let an innocent woman take the blame for your crime. And you were going to get away with it because the marshal was too lazy or too corrupt to do his job properly." "I did not kill anyone," Kane shouted, but his eyes were wild now, desperate. He made a sudden lunge, breaking free from the men holding him, and ran toward the edge of the crowd. But Russell was faster. He tackled Kane to the ground, and they struggled in the dirt until Russell managed to pin him down. "Marshal, I suggest you arrest this man for murder," Russell said, breathing hard. "Unless you want everyone here to know just how badly you failed at your job." Cobb looked sick, but he had no choice. The whole town had seen the evidence, heard the confrontation. If he did not arrest Kane now, he would lose all credibility. He walked over with his handcuffs and secured Kane's wrists, hauling him to his feet. "Vincent Kane, you are under arrest for the murder of Jacob Pritchard," Cobb said, the words clearly tasting like ash in his mouth. "You will be held for trial." The crowd parted as the marshal dragged Kane toward the jail, and suddenly all eyes turned to Zelda. She stood frozen, waiting for continued hostility, but instead she saw faces beginning to shift from anger to uncertainty to shame. These people had condemned her without evidence, had shunned her and starved her and left her to suffer, and they had been wrong. "I am sorry," a voice said. "Mrs. Chen, who ran the dress shop, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "I am so sorry, Zelda. We were wrong about you. I was wrong. Can you ever forgive us?" More voices joined in, a chorus of apologies and regrets. The people of Hangtown were beginning to realize the terrible thing they had done, the injustice they had participated in. Zelda looked at their faces, saw genuine remorse in many of them, and felt the anger that had been burning inside her begin to ease. "I understand that you were afraid," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Someone was murdered and you wanted answers quickly, but you condemned me without giving me a chance to defend myself. You turned your backs on me when I needed help the most. That is not something I can forget easily." "We know," said Mr. Harrison from the feed store, "and we will do whatever it takes to make it right." Zelda looked at Russell, who stood beside her with pride shining in his eyes. He had done this for her. He had stood against an entire town and proven her innocence when everyone else had given up. Because of him, she had her life back. The crowd began to disperse, people returning to their business with subdued expressions. Mrs. Chen approached again. "Your job at the dress shop is waiting for you whenever you want to come back, and your room above the millinery, it is still yours. I never rented it out." "Thank you," Zelda said quietly. "I will think about it." As the street cleared, Russell and Zelda found themselves alone together, standing in the space where her life had almost ended and then been saved. "You did it," she said, looking up at him with wonder. "You proved I was innocent. You saved my life." "We did it together," Russell corrected. You were strong enough to keep fighting when most people would have given up. You trusted me when you had every reason not to. That took courage. What happens now? She asked. Cain will go to trial, I suppose, and I can return to my old life. Is that what you want, to return to your old life? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Zelda thought about going back to the dress shop, to her small room, to the quiet existence she had led before all this happened. It would be safe and familiar. But it would also mean saying goodbye to Russell, and she found that thought unbearable. I do not know, she admitted. A few days ago, that was all I wanted, to have my life back, to be left alone to work and survive. But now, she trailed off, not quite brave enough to finish the thought. Now, Russell prompted gently, now I have met you and everything feels different. I do not want to go back to being alone. She forced herself to meet his eyes, to be honest even though it terrified her. I do not want you to leave. The smile that spread across Russell's face was warm and genuine and full of promise. I was hoping you would say that, because I do not want to leave either. These past few days with you, fighting beside you, seeing your strength and your spirit, it has made me realize how empty my life has been. I have spent 5 years drifting from town to town, chasing criminals and never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. But being here with you, it feels like I have finally found something worth staying for. Hope bloomed bright and fierce in Zelda's chest. What are you saying? I am saying that I would like to stay in Hangtown, if you will have me. I am saying that I would like to get to know you better, to spend time with you properly without the shadow of murder accusations hanging over us. I am saying that when I look at you, I see someone extraordinary, someone I want in my life. He reached out and took her hands in his. Zelda Fairmont, would you allow me the honor of courting you? Tears sprang to her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. Yes, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, I would like that very much. Russell pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Zelda pressed her face against his chest, feeling his heart beating strong and steady beneath her cheek. After so much pain and fear and loneliness, she had found someone who believed in her, who fought for her, who wanted to build something real with her. It felt like a miracle. They stood there in the morning sunlight, holding each other while the town moved around them, and Zelda felt the last of her fear finally release its grip. She was safe. She was believed, and she was no longer alone. Over the following weeks, Hangtown settled back into its rhythms, though with a somewhat chastened atmosphere. Vincent Cain stood trial and was convicted of murder based on the knife evidence and testimony from several witnesses who came forward once they realized they would not be going against the powerful Pritchard family by speaking truth. Cain confessed in the end, admitting that he had indeed thought Jacob cheated him in that poker game and had confronted him in the alley. Things had turned violent, and Cain had stabbed Jacob in a moment of rage. He had then noticed Zelda approaching and had fled, letting her stumble into the aftermath and take the blame. Marshal Cobb was quietly asked to resign, and a new lawman was brought in from Sacramento, a man with a reputation for fairness and thorough investigation. The town made efforts to apologize to Zelda, though she remained somewhat distant from many of them. Some wounds healed slowly, but her relationship with Russell flourished. He took a room permanently at the boarding house and began working as a deputy for the new marshal, using his tracking skills and experience to help maintain law and order. Zelda returned to her work at the dress shop, but now she had something to look forward to beyond just survival. Every evening, Russell would meet her when the shop closed, and they would walk together through town, talking about their days, their pasts, their hopes for the future. He told her about growing up in Texas, about his father's death and his years wandering as a bounty hunter. She told him about losing her parents, about the struggle to make her way alone in a world that was often harsh to women without family or fortune. They shared their fears and dreams, and with each conversation, the connection between them deepened. Russell courted her properly, with flowers and dinners and long walks under the California stars. He was patient and respectful, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, but making his intentions clear. He wanted a future with her. He wanted to build a life together. 3 months after they met, Russell took Zelda on a picnic by a creek outside town. The summer heat had mellowed into autumn, and the air was crisp and golden. They sat on a blanket beneath a cottonwood tree, eating sandwiches and watching the water flow past, and Russell took her hand in his. "Zelda, these past months with you have been the happiest of my life," he said. "You have given me something I did not even know I was missing. A home. A purpose beyond just catching criminals. A reason to stay in one place and build something lasting." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I know we have not known each other very long, but I have never been more certain of anything. I love you, Zelda Fairmont, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. Will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small diamond, and Zelda felt her breath catch in her throat. This man who had saved her life, who had believed in her when no one else would, was offering her forever. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Russell, I will marry you. I love you too, so much it sometimes scares me. You changed everything for me. You gave me back my life and then made it better than I ever imagined it could be." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he kissed her for the first time, soft and sweet and full of promise. Zelda wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into that moment. They were married in the church in Hangtown 6 weeks later, on a bright November day in 1872. Mrs. Chen made Zelda's dress, a beautiful creation of white lace and satin that made her feel like a princess. The whole town turned out for the wedding, their way of showing support and making amends for their earlier judgment. Zelda stood at the altar with Russell's hands in hers, looking into his gray eyes as they spoke their vows, and felt complete in a way she never had before. Russell Vaughn had ridden into her life at her darkest moment and become her salvation, her champion, and now her husband. He had looked at her when everyone else turned away and said the words that changed everything. "I believe you." And in believing her, he had given her not just justice but love. They moved into a small house on the edge of town, a 2-room cottage that Russell bought with his savings, and Zelda immediately began filling with curtains and rugs, and the small touches that turned a structure into a home. Russell continued his work as a deputy, earning respect throughout Hangtown for his fairness and dedication. Zelda kept sewing, taking on private clients and eventually opening her own small shop. Their life together was not always easy. Money was sometimes tight, and Russell's work occasionally put him in danger. But they faced every challenge together, drawing strength from the bond they had forged in those desperate days when the world stood against her, and he had chosen to stand beside her instead. A year after their wedding, Zelda realized she was pregnant. She told Russell one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, and his face lit up with such pure joy that it made her laugh and cry at the same time. He held her carefully, as if she might break, and whispered promises into her hair about being the best father he could possibly be. Their son was born in the summer of 1874, a healthy baby boy with Russell's gray eyes and Zelda's dark hair. They named him Daniel, after Russell's father, and he became the center of their world. Russell would come home from work and spend hours holding his son, talking to him in low, gentle tones about everything and nothing. Zelda would watch them together and feel her heart expand with so much love she thought it might burst. Daniel was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Sarah, and then another son named William 3 years after that. Their house grew crowded and loud and full of laughter. Russell built an addition to give the children more space, and Zelda sewed clothes for them while teaching her daughter the craft that had sustained her through hard times. The years passed in the way that happy years do, each one blending into the next in a tapestry of ordinary moments that accumulated into an extraordinary life. Russell became the marshal of Hangtown when his boss retired, and he approached the job with the same integrity and dedication that had first drawn Zelda to him. She expanded her dress shop, eventually hiring 2 assistants to help with the demand. Their children grew strong and loved. Daniel became a teacher, following in his grandfather's footsteps of serving his community. Sarah married a kind young man who worked at the bank and gave them grandchildren who filled their house with noise and joy. William went east to study law, determined to ensure that justice was available to everyone, not just the powerful. Through it all, Russell and Zelda remained each other's anchor and haven. They still took walks in the evening when they could, still sat on their porch and talked about their days, still looked at each other with the love and appreciation of people who knew how close they had come to never finding each other at all. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1898, their children threw them a party. The whole town came, including many of the same people who had shunned Zelda all those years ago. There were speeches and toasts, and at one point, the new preacher asked Russell to share the story of how he and Zelda met. Russell stood with his arm around his wife, looking at the crowd of friendly faces, and told them about riding into Hangtown as a stranger, about seeing a desperate woman that everyone had condemned, about making the choice to believe her when belief seemed like foolishness. "I looked at Zelda that day and I saw truth in her eyes," he said. "Everyone else saw what they wanted to see, what was convenient to see. But I saw a woman who needed someone to stand beside her, and I decided to be that someone. It was the best decision I ever made. Because in saving her, she saved me right back. She gave me a home and a family and a life filled with more love than I ever thought possible." He turned to Zelda, his hair now silver at the temples, his face lined with age but his eyes still the same steady gray that had looked at her with belief a quarter-century before. "Thank you for saying yes when I asked you to marry me. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for every day, every moment, every memory. I love you, Zelda Vaughn, just as much now as I did when I first told you I believed you." Zelda smiled at him, her own hair now threaded with gray, her hands no longer young but still strong from years of sewing. "And I love you, Russell. You were my miracle, my unexpected blessing, the man who saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. I would not change a single moment of our life together." They kissed to the applause and cheers of the crowd, and their children rolled their eyes with good-natured embarrassment at their parents' display of affection. But watching from the sidelines, many of the older townspeople remembered that dark time when they had been so wrong, so quick to judge, so willing to destroy an innocent woman's life. And they were grateful that Russell Vaughn had been better than them, braver than them, and had found truth where they saw only convenient lies. The party lasted into the night, with music and dancing and too much food. Zelda danced with Russell like they had at their wedding, slower now but no less full of joy. She looked around at her children and grandchildren, at the home she had built, at the man who held her close, and marveled at how drastically her life had changed from that terrible day in 1872, when she thought everything was lost. She had been shunned and condemned, alone and desperate. And then a cowboy had ridden into town, looked at her with clear eyes, and said the three words that altered the course of her existence. "I believe you." From that belief had grown everything she now cherished, a love that had sustained them through decades, a family that brought meaning to every day, a life that was rich and full and exactly what she had always dreamed of, even when she had not dared to dream at all. As the years continued to pass, Russell and Zelda grew old together with the gentle grace of people who had lived well and loved deeply. They slowed down as age demanded, Russell eventually retiring from his position as marshal and Zelda passing her dress shop to her daughter Sarah. But retirement suited them. They had time for long conversations on their porch, for visits from grandchildren who listened with wide eyes to stories of the old days, for simply being together without the demands of work and responsibility pulling them apart. Russell's hair went completely white, and his hands developed a tremor, but his mind stayed sharp, and his love for Zelda never wavered. She developed arthritis that made sewing painful, so she took up knitting instead, making blankets and scarves for everyone in the family. They moved slower, slept more, needed help with tasks that had once been simple. But they faced aging the way they had faced everything else, together. In the spring of 1905, as Hangtown prepared to enter a new century and a new era, Russell and Zelda sat on their porch watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard. The world was changing rapidly, with talk of automobiles and airplanes and innovations that would have seemed like magic when they were young. But some things remained constant. Love, family, the choice to believe in goodness even when the world suggested otherwise. "Do you ever think about that day we met?" Zelda asked, her hand in Russell's as it had been 1,000 times before. "About how close we came to never having any of this." "Every day," Russell admitted. "I think about how I almost rode right through town without stopping. I think about how if I had been an hour later or an hour earlier, we might have missed each other entirely. And I thank God or fate or whatever force brought me to you at exactly the moment you needed someone." "I needed you," Zelda said softly. "And you came. You were my hero, Russell Vaughn. You saved my life in every way a person can be saved. And you gave meaning to mine," he replied. "You turned a drifter into a husband and father. You made me want to be better, do better, build something lasting. Everything good in my life came from the moment I chose to believe you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip toward the horizon, painting the California sky in shades of orange and gold. Their great-grandchildren's laughter drifted up to them, young voices full of joy and innocence. Inside the house, they could hear their family moving around, preparing dinner, living lives made possible by the choice two people made decades ago to trust each other, to fight for justice, to build love from the ashes of injustice. Russell passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1907, with Zelda's hand in his and their family surrounding the bed. He was 73 years old and had lived a life of purpose and love. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched through his work and his character. Zelda stood beside his grave with dry eyes and a heavy heart, knowing that a part of her had been buried with him, but she did not despair. Russell had given her too much, taught her too much about resilience and strength, for her to give up now. She continued living in their house, surrounded by children and grandchildren who made sure she was never alone. She told stories about Russell to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive through words and love. Zelda lived another 8 years, dying in her sleep on a warm summer night in 1915. She was 83 years old. Her last words, spoken to her daughter Sarah just hours before she passed, were simple and content. "I am going to find your father now. He has been waiting for me long enough." They buried her beside Russell in the Hangtown Cemetery under a stone that read, Zelda Fairmont Vaughn. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she was innocent and he believed her. From that belief grew everything. The story of Russell and Zelda became legend in Hangtown, passed down through generations as a reminder of the importance of standing up for truth even when it is unpopular, of believing in people even when everyone else has given up on them, of the power of love to transform lives and build legacies. Their children told their grandchildren, who told their great-grandchildren, ensuring that the tale of the town that shunned her and the cowboy who believed her would never be forgotten. In the end, theirs was a story about more than justice or vindication. It was about the moment when one person chooses to see truth in another's eyes, about the courage it takes to stand alone against a hostile crowd, about how love can grow from the darkest circumstances and flourish into something beautiful and lasting. It was about Russell Vaughn riding into a small California town in 1872 and making the choice that would define the rest of his life: to believe a desperate woman when everyone else had condemned her. And it was about Zelda Fairmont, who survived the worst that humanity could offer and emerged strong enough to build a life filled with love and family and purpose. Their house still stood in Hangtown well into the 20th century, eventually becoming a historical site that schoolchildren visited to learn about justice and integrity, and the Wild West era when a person's word and character mattered more than wealth or influence. The placard outside told the basic facts of the story, but the truth lived deeper than any plaque could convey. It lived in the hearts of their descendants, in the memory of a community that learned a hard lesson about judgment and redemption, in the example they set of what it meant to love completely and believe absolutely. The town of Hangtown, California, eventually changed its name to Placerville as it grew and modernized, but old-timers still remembered the events of 1872, still told the story of the seamstress who was accused of murder and the bounty hunter who proved her innocence. They remembered Marshall Cobb's shame and Vincent Kane's confession, and the way an entire town had learned that the easiest answer is not always the true one. But mostly they remembered Russell and Zelda, the couple who proved that love could be born in the most unlikely circumstances, that standing for truth had value beyond measure, and that believing in someone when they had lost faith in themselves was perhaps the greatest gift one person could give another. Their story became a touchstone, a reminder that in a world often driven by prejudice and assumption, having the courage to look deeper, to question, to believe in innocence until guilt is proven, was not just morally right but essential to justice. The legacy they left behind was not one of wealth or fame or grand achievements in the conventional sense. It was something far more valuable: a family built on love, a community reminded of the importance of fairness, and a story that would inspire people for generations to come. They had lived ordinary lives in extraordinary ways, proving that heroism was not always about grand gestures, but sometimes about the simple act of standing beside someone when they had no one else, of speaking truth when lies were more convenient, of choosing compassion over judgment. And it all began with a desperate woman standing in the street, a stranger on a dusty horse, and 3 words that changed everything: "I believe you." From that moment of faith came a lifetime of love, a family that spanned generations, and a story that would never be forgotten in the small California town where justice nearly failed, but was saved by one man's choice to believe in truth over convenience, in innocence over assumption, in love over loneliness. Their great-great-grandchildren, living in a world of automobiles and electricity, and wonders Russell and Zelda could never have imagined, still told the story. They still visited the graves in Placerville, still felt pride in their ancestors who had stood for something important at a time when it mattered most. The world had changed, but the lessons remained constant. Believe in justice, fight for truth, stand beside those who have no one else, and love with your whole heart. These were the gifts Russell and Zelda had given to their family and their community, and they were gifts that could never be diminished by time or change. In the end, theirs was a love story written in the harsh landscape of the Wild West, born from injustice and desperation, nurtured through belief and courage, and culminating in a life that was everything either of them could have hoped for and more. It was proof that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures, that strangers can become soulmates, that choosing to believe in someone can save not just their life but your own. Russell and Zelda had found each other at the exact moment they both needed saving, and in saving each other, they had created something beautiful and lasting and true. Their story ended not with the drama of that confrontation in the town square, but with decades of quiet love, raised children, built memories, and the peaceful certainty that they had lived well and loved completely. It was, in every sense that mattered, a happily ever after earned through courage, sustained through commitment, and cherished through every moment they were blessed to share.